I recently posted a video where I considered who could replace UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a potential leadership race if he's ousted. As I noted in the video, I don't quite see him being ousted for another year or so at least. But someone I could really see losing their leadership position sooner rather than later is the current leader of the opposition and leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch. Since she took office towards the end of last year, the party's polling has continued on a sad downward trend, and Nigel Farage's Reform UK is in all practical ways the real opposition party. Badenoch has been criticised for failing to deliver a vision for her party, as well as for a series of rather poor performances in the House of Commons and in televised interviews. I should make a declaration here myself for the sake of transparency. I used to be a Conservative Party member and employee, but I have rescinded my membership in large part due to Badenoch's leadership and the direction of the party. In this video, I will go through what I think are the 15 likeliest candidates to replace Badenoch. They're ordered in likelihood from most to least likely, from my verdict. And I think there are really two main frontrunners in this race. I think there are a series of contenders, a series of dark horses, and a handful of long shots. And so that's how I've structured this video. And so without any further ado, let's get into it. And we'll begin with the frontrunners. Rupert Jenrick. Rupert Jenrick is the current Shadow Secretary of State for Justice. He came in a somewhat close second place to Badenoch in last year's leadership contest, and it seems many party members now regret going with Badenoch. This makes Jenrick the far and away favourite to be Badenoch's successor. Although he started his political career as a moderate David Cameron supporter, he has in recent years moved towards the hard right of the party, especially on immigration. In many ways, he represents a version of the Conservative Party, comfortably to the right of Nigel Farage and Reform UK. Jenrick has government experience, having served in various positions in the last many Conservative governments, but he has also managed to distance himself from this time, most notably by resigning from his ministerial position in Rishi Sunak's government in protest against what he argued was too soft of a line on illegal migrants. In Shadow Cabinet, he has continued to get attention due to a series of short, snappy videos he has put out, including one particularly viral one where he confronts fare dodgers on the metro in London. This, alongside his many media appearances, have often seemingly left Team Badenoch struggling to cut through. Jenrick in many ways feels inevitable. His biggest problem, though, can he bring the whole of the party with him to the right? James Cleverly. James Cleverly is the Shadow Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. He is the other main contender to replace Badenoch, and he too ran against her last year when he almost made it to the final membership vote. While Jenrick is the hard right candidate, Cleverly is the moderate candidate, which must be a strange place for this prominent former Boris Johnson and Liz Truss supporter. When the Conservatives were in government, Cleverly managed to hold two of the great offices of state, Foreign and Home Secretary, and he was generally respected across the political aisle and has made himself one of the best known political figures in Britain. When Badenoch was elected leader last year, Cleverly first passed up an offer to join her shadow cabinet, but was recently brought in during a reshuffle, seemingly at least partially to be a way to have a similarly heavyweight counterweight to Jenrick in the shadow cabinet. While I'm sure Cleverly will get far in a future leadership contest, he must be worried that with Reform UK breathing down the party's neck and the general right-wing shift of the membership, that the party will pass on his more moderate approach. The contenders. Chris Philp. Chris Philp is the Shadow Home Secretary. With all due respect to Philp, he is very much a diet version of Rupert Jenrick, initially rising the ranks of the party as a David Cameron-styled Conservative before turning more right-wing with the Times over the last 2 or 3 years. Philp served in a series of junior to cabinet attending positions during the last few years of Conservative government under Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. His big breakthrough with the public seems to have come with his big shadow brief in Kemi Badenoch's shadow cabinet. In this role, he's been allowed to take hardline approaches to immigration and the migrant hotels that have been so controversial up and down the whole of the UK. He seemed to try to replicate some of Rupert Jenrick's approach by making his own short-form videos, the most prominent of which was about how asylum seekers seem to be working illegally for food delivery apps. The problem for Philp is that Jenrick is certainly going to run, so why would the party elect the guy who's trying to be just like Jenrick? That is, unless Philp manages to make an argument that Jenrick may be just too off-putting to more moderate voters, while Philp, being less well-known and more malleable in the public's eye, may be slightly more appealing. Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is the former Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. He served in both of these roles from July 2019 to September 2022. Johnson is probably one of the globally most famous British politicians of this century. He's previously worked as a journalist, as editor of the conservative Spectator magazine. He served as a generally well-regarded mayor of London, and for a short stint he served as Foreign Secretary to Theresa May. Johnson is intrinsically tied to Brexit. His support of and campaigning for Brexit during the campaign was seen as a significant legitimizer of the movement, and he was the Prime Minister who finally successfully brought Britain out of the European Union. As Prime Minister, he also led the UK through the COVID pandemic, the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and introduced the Levelling Up programme, an initiative to bring economic development to often neglected parts of the country. But in 2022, his stock collapsed. This was after reports, photos, and an investigation chronicling Partygate, a scandal wherein 10 Downing Street staff had been breaching COVID regulations. He resigned later in the year following a smaller, different scandal when it became clear he would struggle to find supporters in Parliament who would want to serve in his government. Mere weeks after leaving office, he considered running again after his successor, Liz Truss, resigned after crashing the gilt market, but he ended up deciding not to. There are still many Tories who would have wished that he'd never resigned. Johnson's election victory in 2019 was the best one for the Tories in decades, and he undoubtedly had appeal in parts of the country not traditionally conservative. However, he is deeply tainted by scandal, and in hindsight, many people of the conservative right have started re-evaluating his tenure, blaming him in large part for a spike in immigration that started under his leadership, and which is sometimes called the Boris wave. To be leader, Johnson would have to first get himself elected to Parliament, which would require a successful by-election campaign. That's a lot of hurdles for someone who wouldn't even be certain to win. Mel Stride. Mel Stride is the current Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. Over the past few years of government, he served in a couple cabinet roles, but became best known as Sunak's Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Stride is a moderate conservative and someone who was a very close ally of Rishi Sunak. After the Conservative election loss last year, he was one of the MPs who decided to stand for leader. However, despite making it past the more well-known Priti Patel and building a bit of what was dubbed Melmentum, he was eliminated in the second round. After Badenoch became leader, she appointed Stride as Shadow Chancellor, a role where he's received what would probably be best considered as mixed reviews. Some argue he's been too anonymous in the role, while others argue he has been very good at standing up to Rachel Reeves and is at least partially to credit for tearing down the current government's fiscal credibility. If he were to run again, I think he'll find himself in a much better place than he was in last year, purely because he comes with a stronger title than he did before. However, the party seems to be screaming out for a shift to the right rather than to the centre, and that's just not where Stride finds himself. He's also a bit duller than some of the other main candidates like, say, Jenrick or James Cleverly, and that will also work to his detriment. Tom Tugendhat. Tom Tugendhat is currently a backbench MP who's previously served as the Minister of State for Security for Prime Ministers Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Before that, he served as chair of the prestigious Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Tugendhat has already stood for Conservative Party leader twice now. First in 2022, when he was eliminated in the third round, and again in the 2024 leadership contest, when he again was eliminated in the third round. In both contests, he placed himself somewhere towards the centre, but with a hint of populist economics. Much of Tugendhat's political brand is built on his former career in the army and his focus on foreign, defence and security policy. He was no great supporter of Boris Johnson's, and made his disappointment in the Johnson government known in a powerful speech following the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. While Tugendhat is popular with moderates, and especially in Scotland, where the vast majority of Tory MSPs endorsed him last year, he really struggles with more right-wing conservatives. It should also be noted that he refused to serve in Badenoch's shadow cabinet, which seems to have dissatisfied quite a few party members. And he's been wholly out of the spotlight since last year, making me think that his stock is slowly but surely tanking. The dark horses. Penny Mordaunt. Penny Mordaunt has served in the government of the last 5 prime ministers, and she's attended cabinet of the last 4. Her portfolios have ranged from equalities to international development to defence. But she's probably most well known for serving as Sunak's Leader of the House of Commons, a role that saw her carrying the jewelled sword of offering at King Charles's coronation. Mordaunt is not in Parliament. She lost her seat in the 2024 election. So if she were to stand for leader of the party, she would first need to be elected in a by-election. No small feat for a party which is struggling as much as the Tories are in polling right now. But if she could somehow clear this first hurdle, she would be a very serious contender. She stood for leader in both of the leadership contests of 2022, coming in a close third in the first and failing to get the necessary 100 nominations to qualify for the second. To many, Mordaunt is a little bit tricky to pin down politically, but she's seemingly slightly on the more moderate side of the party, but this ambiguity has also perhaps helped her in becoming someone that many different factions can attach their support to. She's also regarded as hardworking, good with a portfolio, and she's served in the Royal Navy Reserves, making her an all-around really interesting and solid choice, if it weren't for that pesky fact that she's not in Parliament. Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman is currently a backbench MP who has previously served as Home Secretary for Truss and Sunak and Attorney General for Johnson. She's also previously chaired the once very powerful European Research Group, which was the hardline Brexit advocacy group. Braverman is hardcore right-wing, to the right of Robert Jenrick, I would dare say. She stood for leader once before in 2022, making it to the second round of votes before being eliminated, and she considered running in 2024, but she decided against it following some very deeply homophobic comments she'd made and an immense internal backlash against her. That wasn't her first experience with controversy though, with both Truss and Sunak firing her from the Home Office for wholly separate reasons. Truss fired her for breaching ministerial code by sharing classified documents improperly, and Sunak fired her after weeks of controversy where Braverman criticized multiculturalism, said that homelessness was a lifestyle choice, and picked a fight with the police, which she was responsible for in her brief. And that's why, although the Conservatives look like they want to move towards the right, Braverman is so far down the list. She's a bit honestly crazy and unprofessional. Add on top of that the fact that there have been rumours for months about a potential defection to Reform UK, and the fact that for a bit her husband was one of Reform UK's biggest cheerleaders on X, and her future leadership prospects seem low. Priti Patel. Priti Patel is the current shadow Foreign Secretary. She's previously served in the Johnson cabinet as Home Secretary and in May's government as Secretary of State for International Development. Patel is one of the party's right-wingers. She really made a name for herself as a tough Home Secretary and as the person who originated the very controversial now binned Rwanda scheme. She also led the Home Office at a time of harsh crackdowns on protests. She's previously been accused of bullying while serving as Home Secretary, and this has led to quite a few testimonials that she's not very popular with fellow MPs who find her abrasive, rude, and plainly nasty. She stood in the 2024 leadership contest but was eliminated in the first round. During the contest, she seemingly tried to position herself more moderately, something that may also have been very confusing considering her hardline image. As Shadow Foreign Secretary, she's also struggled to really make a lot of noise. Perhaps because Labour and the Conservatives broadly agree on most issues of foreign policy, or perhaps due to her own failings. Patel is someone who I think has had her chance, but is a bit past her political prime. She didn't do very well in last year's contest, she has a lot of contenders in the right-wing lane, and she's not making a splash in opposition. Claire Coutinho. Claire Coutinho is the Shadow Secretary of Energy Security and Net Zero. She held the governmental equivalency of this role during Sunak's government. She has, for the last few years, been seen as a rising star in the Conservative Party. She was first elected to Parliament in 2019 and held her first junior ministerial role in Truss's government, shooting to political stardom during the Sunak years. And she was a big Sunak supporter and someone of the same political essence, relatively moderate with a few right-wing quirks, like her support for Brexit. She was generally well received in her cabinet role during Sunak's government and is therefore someone similar to the likes of Mel Stride or Mordaunt who can be trusted with a portfolio. She may still struggle with name recognition if she decided to run. She's still someone working her way up the party and gaining notoriety. But her performance in Parliament and in the media is strong, so she could well inflate her stock were she to run for leader. And for that very reason alone, I suspect she'll be very much considering a campaign, even if just to make herself a better candidate for the following time around. The long shots. Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt is currently a backbench MP. Before that, he served in a vast amount of cabinet roles, most prominently as Chancellor of the Exchequer after the Truss mini-budget fiasco. But he's also served as Foreign, Health, and Culture Secretary for May and Cameron respectively. Hunt has stood for party leader twice before and had explored a campaign once before that. His best performance was in 2019 leadership contest, where he was the final candidate up against Johnson in the membership vote, where he lost in a bit of a landslide. His attempt to stand in the first of the 2022 contests was less impressive, with him being eliminated in the very first round. Hunt is a moderate. That hurts his chances when the party's looking towards the right. He's also very closely associated with the last many governments, especially with Sunak's. That's also not what the party seems to be looking for. But what he does have going for him is a lot of credibility, arguably across the whole spectrum of the political class in the UK. His principled rollback of Truss's mini-budget and his hawkish approach to combating inflation as Chancellor, his professional approach to the Foreign Office after a chaos-filled Johnson tenure in the post, and his leadership of the Culture Department during the very successful London Olympics all speak in his favour. But he's probably someone who's also past his prime, and who can serve the Conservative Party best as a bit of an elder statesman instead. Kevin Hollinrake. Kevin Hollinrake is the current chairman of the Conservative Party. Before that, he served as Shadow Secretary of State for Housing and in a junior ministerial role in the Business and Trade Department during Sunak's government. Hollinrake is easily the most anonymous person on the list so far, but he's both someone who seems to be treated as a bit of a rising star, someone on the right of the party, and someone who's interested in standing for leadership. Chairman of the Conservative Party is a fairly prestigious role within the party. And make no mistake, Badenoch's decision to appoint him to this role suggests that higher-ups in the party have confidence in him. And when I say the higher-ups, I am, of course, especially talking about Michael Gove, who wields incredible power in the party right now. A quick scroll through Hollinrake's social media also emphasizes that he's someone who's comfortable with the right-wing shift of the Conservative Party, and his voting record implies that's probably where he's the most comfortable. In last year's leadership contest, Hollinrake considered standing for a while before eventually deciding against it. But the mere fact that he was considering it puts him in the conversation, if even as a wholly unknown longshot. Andrew Griffith. Do you want someone more obscure than Hollinrake? Well, let me introduce you to the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Andrew Griffith. Before entering opposition, Griffith served in a series of junior ministerial roles in the governments of Sunak, Truss and Johnson. Before the 2019 election, when he first entered Parliament, he worked for Boris Johnson in 10 Downing Street. Griffith is incredibly anonymous compared to the other people on this list. However, I think he could end up standing as the Badenoch continuity candidate. For those out there hoping that the Tories will find out during a contest that Badenoch's approach was perhaps correct all along. And that's because Griffith is a very close ally of Badenoch's. That could mean he may be someone that Badenoch backers could hitch their wagon to if she were to resign. And all of a sudden, that makes him someone the party machine, which has been heavily reshuffled in Badenoch's favour following her takeover, would be inclined to want to push a bit. But this is obviously a long shot, and it hinges on a borderline conspiratorial theory, but with only 120 Tory MPs, I need to fill this list somehow. Ben Houchen. Ben Houchen is the mayor of Tees Valley, a combined authority in North England. He's also a member of the House of Lords. If the Conservative Party has had one really serious success story since the beginning of 2024, it was the re-election of Ben Houchen as mayor at last year's local elections. And that was down to Houchen's popularity alone. Houchen in many ways represents the positive ideal of Boris Johnson's levelling up agenda, having brought jobs, growth and development to his combined authority. This hasn't come entirely without controversy. In Houchen's case, some accusations of cronyism, but not enough for his re-election last year to be doomed. Houchen struggles with the same issue Johnson and Mordaunt have. He's not an MP. And although I guess he could serve as leader of the opposition from the House of Lords, that would practically be a nightmare. So he would really need to be elected to the Commons before he could be a serious contender. And that's assuming that's something he wants to do. He hasn't expressed any interest for that and seems to be generally content serving as mayor. But let's say he somehow were able to stand, he'd be an excellent candidate. He'd be someone who has a winner narrative about him and someone who knows how to perform well in the north of England, which the Tories lost in last year's election. Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe is an independent MP. He was elected last year for Reform UK, but ended up in a messy conflict with party leadership that accused Lowe of bullying and threatening behaviour. He had the whip suspended and has now cut ties with the party entirely. He's continued to serve as an independent and has become perhaps one of the most well-known MPs currently in Parliament. He's also perhaps the most right-wing MP in Parliament, especially with regards to his views on immigrants, multiculturalism, and Islam. Lowe has spearheaded an initiative for an independent inquiry of Pakistani rape gangs. He leads a campaign calling for mass deportations, and he was one of the most significant defenders of Lucy Connolly, a woman who was jailed for an incendiary social media post during the riots last summer. Lowe has also founded a political organization, not a party, just want to make that clear, to push his views called Restore Britain. Members of different parties, mostly the Conservatives and Reform, have joined while still staying members of their current party. Lowe is not a Conservative. but he has been flirting with the party since he cut ties with Reform UK. Most of the MPs he works with on his various parliamentary projects are Conservatives, and there are a lot of Conservatives in Restore Britain. If Lowe were to join the Conservatives, and I'm quite confident he'd be welcome, he would probably be the most credible candidate with the far right of the party. And that seems to be the most prominent one right now. And he can make the argument that he would move the Conservatives to the right of reform, which I'd already argue they invariably are. But he isn't a Conservative as of right now. And it's pretty unheard of for a guy to more or less join a party one day and take control of it the next. And that's it. The 15 people I reckon are the most serious contenders to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Are there any you think I missed? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.